All right, music fans, welcome back. Harmless Dave here, talking about real music in real time for real people just like you and just like me. So, I did some research earlier today talking about Steve Perry and settling his lawsuit with Phil Brown, which was interesting. But I stumbled upon, probably thanks to the YouTube algorithm, I stumbled upon this really interesting footage from the Raised on Radio era. And if you know anything about what happened, the band took a fairly long hiatus following the Frontiers album. Some observations I'm going to make, because that's normally what I do, because that's, the name of the channel and so forth. I think the band was tired. I think Perry was more exhausted than the rest of the guys. I also think that Perry had grown really weary of arena-style rock. It took a lot out of him vocally speaking. Not to say that Raised on Radio didn't have some challenging songs on it, but probably not as challenging as things like Don't Stop Believin' and Separate Ways. Those albums contained a lot of material that was trying to one-up the competition. Steve Perry was an R&B, a rhythm and blues specialist, and he had yet to really sing R&B music with Journey. He had just finished Street Talk, and that album was very successful, and it had a lot of R&B overtones on it. It was West Coast, it was R&B, the songwriting was great, the playing was terrific. He got to hang out with some top-notch studio musicians. He really got exposed to almost like a new world of musicianship. So when he came back, he was like, hey, if we're going to do Journey, we got to take it up a notch. Which in Steve's brain meant getting rid of both Ross, Valerie, and Steve Smith. And according to Neil Schon, it was more than just Steve laying the law down.
We had a lot of internal problems, as getting along as people, and just other things that were problems, other personal problems. And so we decided just to take some time off and just give it a breather.
You call it a breakup, call it some time apart. Either way, it needed to get apart from itself, away from itself, and to see if it wanted to come back together.
Of course, with that break came a certain amount of insecurity from our part, especially since we didn't really keep in touch as well as I'd like to have kept in touch.
I don't think that we were defined as to who we were individually or collectively as a group, and we needed to break apart and touch the walls and find out what kind of a personal life you have left.
And it was sort of hard for me to adjust to at first. I had to find different things to do and find different things to keep me entertained, and it was tough. I got in a lot of trouble, too, when I was off the road, just because I was not busy enough.
Some members, when we regrouped, unfortunately, had their heart and souls into the group, but weren't growing in the kind of direction I think that John and Neil and myself were.
One day I called up Steve and I said, what the hell are you doing? Let's get back together. I want to get on the road. I'm getting tired of being home.
Basically, it is a brand new band with brand new positives and brand new negatives. It's just like anything else, but it's worth it. At least it's got the balance again.
Wow. So everybody is kind of okay. Neil just wants to get back to work. John feels insecure because he hasn't really communicated with anybody. And Steve says, hey, it's a brand new band. It's better than ever. Or, it's got its positives and negatives. But at the beginning of the clip, Neil alludes to the fact that there is some personality conflict there. People not getting along with one another. And the fact that these three guys came back together again would probably illustrate that it wasn't them, it was probably the other two guys. Even though nobody's, really spilling the beans on that. In this same video here, we find out that Neil Schon thinks Randy Jackson is one of the great bass players of all time. And you had Mike Baird and Randy Jackson on the road. I think you had Laurie London in the studio working on Raised on Radio. So these were really high caliber studio musicians. again, keep in mind, Perry, during Street Talk, got to work with a lot of great musicians. So his world was kind of opened up a little bit more. But I find this is really fascinating because it's kind of a preview of what would happen again in 1998. And if you're looking at control, Perry had complete control. From the Infinity album up until Frontiers, albums by Journey had these one-word titles, these futuristic, Evolution, Infinity, Frontiers, Departure, Escape. And then all of a sudden, Perry comes in and takes control and says, nope, we're going to do an album about my youth, which was raised on radio. Because if you know Perry's story, radio helped literally raise this guy. When he was lonely, radio was his best friend. And then even later, when he comes back to help out and do Trial by Fire, you've got another one-word title for a Journey album. Perry leaves, and we're back to one-word titles. Steve Augeri shows up for Arrival. And Journey, by the way, has kept that going. Arrival, Revelation, and then Eclipse. And that's the last studio album. So they went back to the Herbie theme, which was do these one-word title albums. It's a brand, and if you continue doing it like Chicago had the Roman numerals, I think it worked for Journey, although Steve Perry said, nope, And those albums, you can't argue with how good those albums are. So anyway, I found this rather fascinating, that this was kind of the precursor to what would happen in 1998, except Perry had a serious dilemma with his hip, and the band, again, didn't know what to do with themselves. They wanted to get back on the road. They've pretty much been on the road ever since, every year, whether it's Steve Augeri or Jeff Scott Soto or Arnel Pineda. They've been on the road ever since. And Steve, not so much. Steve is basically back to where he was, in 1985, taking a break and doing what he wants to do and so forth, and finding out if he has any personal life still left. Really fascinating. All right, so I'm done with this video. Hopefully it was enlightening and informative. Don't forget to subscribe and smash the notification bell for notifications. And you can join us over on Patreon for just $1 a month, and we all have fun and interesting conversations. I tend to post lost classics and songs and just all kinds of topical stuff. So, plus my blog posts are over there as well from time to time. Again, for just $1 a month, you can be part of all of the fun and frivolity over on Patreon. All right, I am done. I will return soon.